The people who are most likely to take your rights away is actually not your state, local, or federal government. It's special interest groups, it's activists.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 398. I'm talking to Frank Schumpert. He's been a police officer in South Carolina, and he'll tell you more about his background right now. How are you doing, Frank?
I'm doing great, Chris. How's it going with you in Texas?
All right, yeah. And we're going to talk about rape and rape reports and stuff like that. So, yeah. So tell us what your background is, Frank.
Okay, well, first of all, Chris, I really appreciate it with you having me on your podcast, and wherever this is being streamed and showed. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yes.
What I would like to do is give you a little bit of information about my background and a little bit about the street cred, why I'm qualified to talk about what I'm talking about. I graduated college back in 2007 with a double major in history and philosophy. So you can imagine what my employment opportunity was looking like at the time. And about the year 2009, I noticed that the local police departments and sheriff's departments in South Carolina were hiring for patrol officers. So in 2010, I submitted an application around at different departments, and I was eventually hired on, and I started at the Kershaw County Sheriff's Department in South Carolina. I was at Kershaw County Sheriff's Department from that year going over until roughly the later part of 2016, where I later went to work for the South Carolina Department of Revenue. This was the tax enforcement arm of the state of South Carolina, where I investigated tax evasion and tax fraud. And I'm sure with this being a libertarian channel, we could have a very, very interesting and fruitful and charitable a discussion on that. But I was invited onto the podcast by our gracious host Chris here, because there was a Twitter exchange, or X. It used to be called Twitter. It's X now. About sexual assault allegations that proved to be unsubstantiated. So I wanted to come on and talk about it. So to give you a little bit more deeper background about me, I quit state service and law enforcement in 2023, and I'm currently employed at John E. Reid and Associates as a seminar instructor for interviewing and interrogation. So I use what's called the Reid technique when I was in law enforcement to conduct interviews and interrogations. I'm also a licensed private investigator in South Carolina, where I enjoy trying to get into some cases and to continue to use the technique that was so effective for me. And the Reid technique would probably be a subject for another day. Also, a little bit about me. I'm also the host of Reid on the Record podcast. Me and another instructor at John Reid and Associates, we answer our critics' challenges. We will review actual, real interviewing and interrogation videos out there in a charitable mindset is what we do. So that's floating around out there. So that's a little bit of my street cred. As a law enforcement officer in the state of South Carolina.
And that's R-E-I-D, Reid?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Just want to clarify
yes,
that.
Yeah, that's right. REID, the Reid technique. It is the oldest interviewing and interrogation school in the United States. Lots of schools out there have copied our methodologies. Instead of there being 9 steps of interrogation, they'll have 4 or 5 out there, But plenty of people have copied us, but we are the OG of interviewing and interrogations in North America. But with that being said, there was a discussion on X, and I can't quite remember what the context of it was, Chris, but it was about, hey, what proportionality, what do we think about false sexual assault allegations? So what I would like to do for you, Chris, with your permission, is read out a couple of stats that I worked as a criminal investigator for the sheriff's office in South Carolina.
Yeah, I'd love to hear these numbers.
Okay, so I worked as a criminal investigator. This is essentially a detective full-time for your listeners that may be, a little bit unfamiliar with police terminology. The cases I worked would have been between 2011 and 2016. This is where I got a lion's share of my majority of experience in interviewing and interrogation. I worked a total of 102 sexual assault cases. So that was the total ones that I worked as the lead primary investigator on. Of those 102 cases, 55 of those cases were what we would call an adult versus a minor case. This is where an adult is allegedly having some kind of sexual contact with someone who was under the age of 18. Majority of my victims were between the ages of 2 and 11, so that's a majority of those 55 cases. Of those
And that's
55
really
cases,
kids, yeah.
yes, sir. Yes, sir, kids.
Yeah,
And as we talked about before, I wasn't sure what I was allowed to say and what not to
yeah.
say. Of those cases that I worked, 31 of them, I brought charges against a perpetrator where there was above and beyond probable cause for charging the suspect as having some type of sexual contact with a minor. So I did arrest 31 out of those 55. 47 cases were what we refer to as 18 plus on 18 plus. So this would be your standard kind of sexual assault case out there. Anything from date, RAPE word, to a stranger danger kind of cases. But I investigated 47 of those. Of those 47 that I investigated, I brought charges against 18 of the suspects. All 18 of the suspects confessed to me during an interrogation of the crimes. Now, I know that there's been some controversy over interrogations. The methodology that I use, the Reid technique, what we teach is that the confession is never the end of the story. You never threaten, you never promise. You always make sure that Miranda has been handled in a legal and ethical way. And what the reason why my charges stuck, Chris, is because they provided for me all 18 of these confessions, evidence that I didn't know about, that I later was able to get a search warrant and substantiate the confession. We call that an independently substantiated confession. They cleaned themselves up with the victim's underwear. I didn't know about that. It wasn't part of my investigation. And later, I got a search warrant after the confession. I would find the underwear through a search warrant, and DNA would match up to my suspect, and it would substantiate what their confession was. So we're not just locking someone up because they say that they did it. But 18 of those, I was able to bring charges against them. Of all of the sexual assault cases that I worked, Chris, 14 were actually verified as false allegations, meaning that a victim or a witness had been deceptive in their initial statement to law enforcement as to what actually happened, as to their consent being overrode by either threats of force or actual violence. So basically, 14 false R word cases that I worked. Of those 14 cases, I later brought charges against 4 of them for false statement to the police. This was back when the statutes in South Carolina, that's pretty much the only thing that they would allow for. I mean, was false statement to the police. So that's a little bit about the numbers. Of those 14 cases that were unsubstantiated sexual assault cases, Chris, 3 of them were cases where the minor victim, a child, had either been coached or they were making up a story about having sexual contact with an adult. I don't want to talk about those. We can talk about those, but I think the
Yeah.
context of X was more about adult on adult. So what I was looking at is 11 of them were adult on adult cases. And I would like to add that 2 of the suspects, okay, well, 2 of the alleged the victims were actually male victims making a false allegation against a female alleged suspect. So if the haters out
Oh,
there are
God.
thinking, oh, this is anti-woman, it's not. Men will make up a bullshit story. We're starting to close the gender gap in that regard, unfortunately, right?
Wow.
But yeah,
Why?
so 2 of
Why?
them were male. Yeah, why? So one of them made up a story to cover up another crime that he had been committing, and the other one did it just because he had some kind of mental problem out there. But I'm going to talk about the why in just a little bit. Of the 9 remaining ones, where an adult woman made up an allegation of sexual assault against a male suspect, um, 4 of them were 20 years old, 3 of them were 19 years old, 1 was 23, and 1 was 24. So that's my now. I'd like to add before I break down these numbers even more for us is that I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a counselor. I don't have scientific numbers to back up anything that I'm saying. I go off of anecdotal evidence a whole lot. If you want to convince me of an argument, you could bring scientific studies all you want. I may or may not look into them. I look at, hey, what have I experienced in my real life, right? So I'm not coming at this from like a case study that lasted like decades, but of those numbers that I gave you, here's my personal professional opinion on the 5 factors that I believe are present in false rape allegations that I've experienced talking to law enforcement when I teach the Reid technique of interviewing and interrogation in the networks of law enforcement that I'm still a part of. I still talk to sexual assault investigators. The number one is going to be if the female victim is between the ages of 18 to 25. The second one is if both of the subjects have been engaging in excessive amounts of alcohol or drugs. I don't mean like they had a beer that day or they smoked a joint earlier in the morning. I mean, they're kind of buzzed to where if they had to drive, it may be a little bit swivelly, right? Might be a little bit swivelly if they had to drive. Number three, and this is going to be a spat against the male species. But number three would be that the male subject acts in a way that makes the female half of the sexual contact feel really bad, feel ashamed, or they engage in what I can only describe for you, Chris, would be creepy, stalky, weird shit. They'll follow the person home. They'll tell everyone that they had sex with this person, but they do a lot of irrational things after the sexual contact. But that's a third factor. The fourth one is that if the female victim has a history of mental illness, cutting in high school, excessive running away, depression, bipolar disorder, if she's now, there's nothing against folks who are suffering from that, okay? But to kind of move on, number five is that there was some type of actual sexual contact or it almost happened, right? So there really could be a little bit to substantiate that initial allegation out there. Now, these 5 factors that I've outlined for you and your listeners and viewers, Chris, is descriptive. It is not proscriptive. I'm not going to tell anyone what to do or what not to do. Okay. I look at it like, hey, if you show up at the beach at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and you want to go for a swim every now and then, you may see a sign posted that says warning riptide currents. Now you can still swim out there, but it's like, hey, the chances of you catching an undertow and being drug out and having to have a real boring swim back to shore, instead of it being here, well, it's been elevated up here. So the 5 factors that I've outlined, I'm not victim blaming. I'm not telling someone what to do or what not to do. But if you are in a social dynamic type of situation, and if those 5 little factors are present, I would use a lot of prudence and good judgment as to what you're going to do moving forward out of that.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the 5 factors. Well, one of the factors you mentioned, so for example, there might be a consensual relations, but then the guy is kind of stockish.
Yeah.
After.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so she's trying. So in this case, the woman is just probably trying to figure out how do I get rid of this guy or make this guy leave me alone. That's pretty sympathetic in my view. And there are guys, unfortunately, who will be that way. Because it's a
I had this one victim, and she said, well, like, I'll give you an example of it. Okay, let's look at the first factor, and this is going to tie into your very astute observation there, Chris. But the 18 to 25 age range, it doesn't mean that a young person is stupid. It doesn't mean that they're inexperienced. But what it means is that their experience at putting up boundaries and telling somebody no, they're not going to be as experienced as someone like you and me. And I have to say, even today, when it comes to personal and work related issues, I have trouble saying no to my boss sometimes, right?
yeah.
So, if we think about it back then, some folks are so conflict averse, they don't want to lose status. in their social standing, that 18 to 25 age range. And again, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a neuro person like that, but it seems like they're learning what boundaries are. They're learning what they're comfortable with, what they like and what they don't like. That's why it's the danger zone. But the creepy, stalky behavior by men. Let me give you an example from a case that I actually worked, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go
If
ahead.
that's okay. So I had this case that originated in Richland County. She was part of a really tight social circle. There was a bunch of male friends, there was a bunch of female friends, and a large group of that social circle had joined the Army, and part of them was at the basic training at Fort Jackson in South Carolina. So she didn't join, but she was kind of left outside of that tranche of her social circle that went for training. So it was basically her and four other people who she was hanging out in her group. And so they're all talking about their friends going through basic training. Well, one of the people who she's hanging out with has always had like a crush on her. And not only has he always had a crush on her, but he feels a little bit put out because she's told him to his face. She said, "Look, I'll hang out with you and we'll go out drinking with our friends, but I don't want to have sex with you." And she said, "I just don't, I don't like you that way." And he got kind of frustrated because he's thinking, well, you know what? She's gone out and she slept with all my other male friends. Why won't she sleep with me? So, what he did on a Saturday is he was pestering her for sex. They would go out drinking at a bar with their friends. He would put his hand on her thigh. She would move his hand, tell him to stop. And he would stop for a couple of hours. Then they went off somewhere and smoked some weed. And then, but he kept asking her for sex, asking her for sex. And she was telling him no. Now, at that point, this is where the creepy, stalky bullshit behavior on the man, he should have just quit and drove home, right? Well, he kept asking her for sex, and eventually she says, "You know what? I tell you what, let's go out to the car and I'll give you some oral sex if you promise to leave me alone after that." And he said, "Okay." He goes over to where the car is, right? And this time they're in Kershaw County, so they're in my jurisdiction. That's how I got brought into the case. She performs oral sex on him, and then he wants to go all the way, and she tells him no. And then he gets really mad at her. So she gets out of the car, she kicks the car door shut, and she walks away. Well, then she calls another male friend to come over and pick her up. He picks her up. Well, a couple of days later, she notices that male half who she had sexual contact with has followed her home from work. He's waiting outside of her driveway. And not only that, but he's told everyone in the friend group that he got a BJ from her, right? So now she's embarrassed. Now her reputation is suffering within the friend group because he was kind of low on the totem pole in that social dominant little hierarchy that they had established. And so eventually, her girlfriend says, "Look, is it true that, you gave so and so a BJ?" And she says, "Yes, but he forced me to do it. I didn't want to." So she didn't make the initial report to law enforcement. Her friend did, right? And then by the time I got involved in it, I'm interviewing everyone, I'm talking to everyone, and I discovered that, hey, you know what? It wasn't actually a sexual assault. And she says, "I just felt like garbage after this creepo. He just kept pestering me and pestering me and pestering me. I decided to give him a BJ just to get him off of my ass." And then it probably would have ended at that, but he's following her home after that. He's showing up at her job. And then he's texting everyone in that little friend group basically that he was able to get with her that evening. And then she went from being hurt and upset to being really, really pissed off. She told her friend that. So during the interview process, she revealed that there was no threat, there was no physical threat, and she didn't feel particularly pressured to give him a BJ. She was just irritated by him. But his steady persistence in going for sex after she told him no, what happened to him, Chris, is that he ended up walking into that gray zone, right? That gray zone where really he should have backed off. Now, no arrest was made in either case. But from what I understand, and I can't reveal everything off of the case, but he was arrested later for stalking behavior against another woman. Now, my alleged victim didn't want to do anything as far as him stalking her. She just wanted the whole thing to go away. So I ended up having an uncooperative witness in that case. But this is what gets that's one common factor that I've seen in a lot of these cases like that. Now, she admitted that, hey, I told my friend that just because I wanted to save face. And in her own words, she said, he didn't rape me. It was my decision. But what happened is the story got blown out of proportion at that point. So that's what happens a lot of
Yeah.
times. Yeah.
But it's like the salesperson who calls you every day, and then after
Good
the
analogy. Yeah.
salesperson calls you 30 times, you eventually just said, "Look, if I buy something, will you go away?" There really is. I don't find this man to be a sympathetic character at all. That just obviously, I think he's a guy who needs some help, and maybe figures out a way to, because it's unfortunate because a lot of times stockish men they do things worth they do horrible things sometimes. And it's really unfortunate. I don't know how we deal with these kind of guys or help how a guy lets go. I don't know. It's just but anyway, yeah, that's some of these other. Do you have any other examples that you thought were kind of
Mhm.
interesting?
Oh, yeah. So I mentioned the Fort Jackson base, right, in South
Yeah,
Carolina, which is, from what I understand, now I never served in the military myself, so I could be talking out of turn, but it's the largest, I believe, basic military training in the region. The Army's there, Air Force is there. We have all kind of branches there. But there was a certain point where there was a family that was living in Kershaw County, okay? And one of the family members, her husband was in the Army. And for those of you in the service, you probably already know where this is going. He went over for a training at it was some Southeast Asian specific island, and he was gone for about 10 weeks, right? Well, he eventually returns back to South Carolina, and his wife immediately jumps on him, right? And she's trying to have sex with him and constant sex with him. And he said that he felt like something was off in his statement to me. He says, I felt like something was off. She's never really been a real like sexual person. And he says, and the second time we had sex, she runs out of the bathroom and hugs me and says that she's pregnant. Well, he started talking to his mom and older sister, and they said, look, a woman doesn't know that she's pregnant immediately after having sex with you, right? So, but he kind of kept his cards close to his chest. And I believe when she went for the first prenatal checkup, he looked at when conception probably would have happened because they were looking, and the math wasn't mathing. Okay. As I tell my students, math wasn't mathing. So, he confronted his wife about the math not mathing, and she said, "Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but I was at the gym one day. This would have been a gym in Kershaw County, and this fella that worked at the gym, he's a trainer, offered me a ride home because my car wouldn't work." And so I got in the car with him, and before you knew it, on the way home, he had unconsensual sexual contact with me, and I'm using that term instead of the R word, right, for our
yes,
show here.
yeah,
So she invented a story to hide the fact that she was pregnant, and she had basically stepped out on her husband, is what it is. And the way that I was able to kind of uncover this is I did a photo lineup of most of the personal trainers at the gym, and she wouldn't want to pick them out. What you're going to notice if you do interviews of people who are being deceptive, Chris, is if you ask them a direct question, they very rarely want to give a direct answer. And I would say, "Hey, is this the personal trainer who raped you?" And she would say, "Well, I mean, you know what? I didn't have a lot to eat that day. I don't really know." And come to find out during interrogation, it wasn't a personal trainer who did it. She had a boyfriend who she knew in high school. She was from Camden, South Carolina. He was from out of state. And she had hooked up with an ex boyfriend, and she'd actually been seeing him for close to a year. So she concocted a story to invent why she was pregnant, but also to cover for her, for her boyfriend and stepping outside of the marriage. And so during interrogation, she gave the real name of the father of the child. I did a separate interview with him. He substantiated her story. I found through a search warrant, right? Found articles of her clothing at his house. And he told me, he showed me text messages between them. And then I brought her in, and during an interrogation, after step one of interrogation, she admitted to me, she says, look, you know what? I made the whole thing up. I just didn't want to lose my husband because he got really good benefits with the Army, which is, she didn't say that she loved her husband, right? But so that's another example of a false rape allegation. Now, if you look at this, she was, and you can probably tell how I broke it down, right? She was
Yeah.
all of 19 years old, and her husband was 31 years old. So, uh, massive age gap there. And I'm not going to get into the age gap thing. I don't have an opinion on it one way or another, but you can already kind of see she's kind of in that danger zone. During the behavioral, I'm sorry, during the background investigation of this victim, or the alleged victim, right? I determined through research that, hey, you know what? She had committed suicide. She tried to commit suicide in high school. She was a chronic runaway. She had been abused, and she had suffered from, I forget what it's called. It's like the least most severe version of depression. It's like dystemic depression. I'm probably
Yeah,
just
there's I'm not really sure what the
yeah,
term.
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I
No,
know where
but
you're coming from. Yeah, where you're going
yeah.
with this. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but a history of mental illness or age, smoking weed constantly. Nothing wrong with smoking weed, but and not only that, but there was actual sexual contact. So we have 4 out of those 5 factors right there with her. And that's, and the factors I mentioned are just one aspect that we use to evaluate an entire case now. But that's an example of it.
Yeah.
Uh, mhm.
It seems like there are a lot of cases of trying to cover up cheating in all this.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. There's a
Sometimes
lot of
they'll
stuff
say
like that. Yeah.
they'll say it they'll say it was they'll make it up about a third person, or they'll say it was non, or they'll say something that wasn't consensual was consensual. It just
Yes.
this is really unfortunate. This I don't know what happened to the husband in the case, but I hope he ended up.
Oh yeah. Well, once she confessed to what she did, I really wanted to charge her and lock her up. But if you
Yeah,
work at a sheriff's department, a lot of times there's politics involved in it. You have to run a sensitive case like that up the chain of command. And the prosecutor at the time, over our circuit, over Richland and Kershaw County, he did not want to go after false rape allegation folks, right? His whole thing was he was worried about real victims not wanting to come forward, which I think that's a completely bogus reason for not charging someone. If somebody's really been sexual assaulted, they almost cannot not talk about it and it not get reported a lot of times. At least in the
we
majority of the aspects I did, I don't think that would do it at all. And
yeah
um,
that,
definitely
that
not my opinion.
that's the song. That's the song I hear all the time. Is we can't prosecute the liars because then the real victims won't come forward. And I really that was what I was going to ask you. Why is this allowed to happen so much? And is that the reason why? I mean,
No, there's so
there's a
here's
lot. Men
yeah,
are getting more and more upset. I mean, a lot of men are just saying, that they should get the same jail time for making the accusation
I
as
absolutely agree with that.
as
I absolutely agree with that.
because
If you are yeah. Mhm.
because we have and more because I think men are seeing this happen more and more, and they're just getting upset. And not to mention, you have cases where there's legal cases, but you also have cases, where uh, other cases, for example, a guy will be at a conference and somebody will try to get him thrown out of the conference, or a guy will be in a social situation or something like that. And I these are things that have no consequences at all for. But if there's no consequences for lying, how do you? Unfortunately, consequences seem to be the only thing that keep people honest anymore.
Well, I'll tell you this, and I echo those frustrations and those feelings right there. And I've always told my friends and family, I've said, look, the people who are most likely to take your rights away, it's actually not your state, local, or federal government. It's special interest groups, it's activists, it's people with a chip on their shoulder who think they're right and they're campaigning and crusading for something. Those are the people I'm afraid of and I worry about, right? I've seen the incompetence of government. I'm not really that afraid of them. But here's the real reason, Chris, why prosecutors don't charge people who have made a substantiated false allegation of any kind. The number one thing is that they are overwhelmed with cases on their docket and they want to minimize incoming cases as much as possible. But the second reason is law enforcement. Uh, and I'll say this as a former cop, as a former detective, I can say it, I have a right to say it. They will give shitty cases to prosecutors. They will give them a case that barely has enough probable cause to it. It's not dependently or independently verified. And a prosecutor's standpoint, if they're going to move forward with a false rape charge against somebody, they want a case that is 100% lock solid, because those activist groups that I just mentioned will come gunning for them if they arrest someone for this. But law enforcement, through lack of training, we are bleeding out experience. And not only that, but the art of interrogation is dying. It is a dying craft in our nation, and they're presenting cases with dependent evidence, no independent evidence, and without a confession that's not substantiated. So prosecutors will turn it away because they're overworked, and they'll turn it away because cops are given shitty cases. And I'm trying to do my part, at least with the interviews and interrogation standpoint, because you need that person recorded audio and video to tell you not only that they made up a story, but why they made up a story, what their motivation was, and they need to tell you something that verifies the evidence I've gathered without sharing them evidence, or they give me a new piece of evidence that can verify independently, substantiate their confession. If you don't get that kind of stuff lined up on a silver platter to a prosecutor, they'll drop the case. Right? They'll drop it. They won't take it. They'll tell you to go away with it. And it isn't just false accusation cases, Chris. It's all the cases: homicide, domestic, your sexual
Yeah.
assault cases. The prosecutors are putting the bar of probable cause higher and higher and higher. But the training and experience of your law enforcement detectives keeps going down and down and down with every single year, unfortunately. So, I mean, it's a
Wow.
problem on both sides of it.
What do you think we can do about prosecutors' caseloads?
So the number one thing that we can do is start with law enforcement. Train law enforcement how to do really, really good cases. If you have a case that has a confession, independent, substantiated evidence to support that confession, then most of the time that's a case that's going to get pled out really, 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 really quickly. Okay. And believe it or not, public defenders, they don't like defending people of moral turpitude or people who are pieces of shit. They would love to sit their clients down and say, hey, this is what the prosecutor has on you because of law enforcement. You better take the plea deal now. They would love to. Now, I'm going to try and get you the best plea deal, blah, blah, blah. But it starts at the bottom with law enforcement not giving prosecutors, a turd sandwich. Give them a good case, right? And if you give them a good case, then they're not going to worry about their docket expanding because they can move those cases quick, is what they can do.
Yeah.
The second thing that you need to do is we have to train prosecutors with real trial experience. Now, I'm not a lawyer, I've never been an attorney, but I've been in a lot of situations in various states now where I've seen deputy prosecutors with very little trial experience. And I could be talking out of my ass here. And if you're an attorney, I'm sorry. I respect lawyers, I respect the law profession, but it seems like a lot of them are afraid to go to trial. And the number one thing that makes them scared to go to trial is law enforcement giving them a shitty case. And not only that, them not having a lot of experience doing trial kind of stuff. So I think if we could train law enforcement to produce a better work product for prosecutors, that would handle a lot of these cases, and they would, sorry, they would be more willing to go after people who are making false accusations.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. Because as far as from what I hear, most cases end up getting plea bargained anyway.
Oh yeah, yeah, and most of them. Now, there's nothing wrong with the plea deal. There's nothing wrong at all. A lot of times, a victim can get better justice through a plea deal, whether it's a jury trial or a plea deal. Our Constitution makes allowances for both of them. But the benefits of a plea deal, number one, is that your victim won't have to take the stand and undergo cross-examination by a defense attorney. That's probably the biggest selling point of a plea deal. I know a lot of prosecutors have gotten some heat for doing a plea deal for like some really egregious or defendants at that point in the legal system. But what you don't see going on behind that is they'll line up all of their witnesses, Chris, and say, okay, are you ready to testify? And they say, oh, hell no, I don't want to testify and have to take the stand. And they'll talk to a victim and say, hey, the defense attorneys, they're going to ask you these 20 questions. Are you okay with that? And they say, oh man, they're going to ask me all that. I don't want to do it. Right. So a lot of them, it's not that they necessarily want a plea deal, but if you don't have a deep bench of people ready to take the stand and are ready to go to battle to see that that justice is served for the defendant, then they'll just plead the cases out. And I can't say that I really blame them in that,
Yeah.
in a matter like that, um, and but yeah, so.
Well, yeah, I mean, if everybody who got a traffic ticket went to court, the system would collapse because it'd be overwhelmed. It's one of those things, yeah, yeah. Any other cases, where it was just really that you can tell me that were, like this is one. Well, for example, the whole incident of two people being intoxicated. The joke. If it's two lesbians and they're both intoxicated, which one's the victim? Which
Which
one's
one is the victim? Yeah,
you know,
that's right. You gotta love X.
yeah,
Do you know what? X is becoming a force that's really been shaping the cultural narrative. I mean, it has absolutely been turned around by Elon. He is it's amazing how a tweet can go out and then it can just automatically affect the conversation in there. But so here's the way alcohol and drugs are affected. Colleges can say, hey, if the boy drinks and the girl drinks, it's always the boy's fault. That doesn't cut it with cops. That doesn't cut it
yeah,
with law enforcement, Chris. We don't give a shit who was drinking. But what I've just noticed is that in the background, if there's a lot of alcohol involved, right, that's just one of the factors that I've seen in there. It doesn't mean the alcohol is at stake, but a lot of times it can lead to two parties, especially if the female is younger than 25. She's not really used to putting up boundaries. Communication, she's still working on. And men too. I mean, when I was 24 years old, I was absolutely stupid. Okay. I mean, I was running around like a chicken with its head cut off. I'm not picking on women, but but I have seen when people get inebriated in that age, they tend to make really, really stupid, foolish mistakes. And it can put them in a situation that they later regret. They tell their friend about it, and then their friend says, oh well, it sounds like you were raped, because now you don't want to do it. And that delayed regret is something most women, once they make it out of age 25, it almost disappears after that. She may wake up the next day and go, oh man, this guy was a unemployed loser. Or maybe she would like it, I don't know. It seems like a lot of women seem to like the losers out there. But the delayed regret, 18 to 25, that's a big danger zone for it. So the five factors that I've worked in my little narrow world of law enforcement, those five factors is what I've seen in there. So, but
yeah.
as for stories out there, I have a date rape story for you. That's I have a
Okay,
date rape story. All right, it's time. But
yeah, mm,
so there was a theater. In fact, it's the only theater in Kershaw County. Although I heard rumors that there was a drive-in theater, although I never found it or went to it. But she was 20 years old, and he was in his 30s. I can't remember what his exact age was. But he goes over to her house. He picks her up. And they go out to a movie, right? Well, they decide to go to a lonely, abandoned country road in the top part of the county. They're making out. They're making out, and he tries to have sex, and she tells him no, and he says, "Okay, fine, that's all right. I respect your decision." He drives her home, and then he drops her off, right? Well, she eventually tells her mom that she was out with this guy, right? And her mom says, well, did he try anything? And she told her mom, and she said, well, yeah, he did. He was getting a little filly, but I told him no, but he respected me and he left. Well, his mom and her father I have to be very careful. I don't want to give you some more information about the parents other than they were really religious, okay? But they were really religious and they were really horrified that their daughter, because they thought she was going out with a group, she had lied about it and she had gone back, all this. And eventually they kept asking her, "Are you sure that he didn't do anything else? Are you sure he didn't do anything else? Did he make you feel uncomfortable?" And they worked on her for weeks. And then finally she said, "All right, all right, all right. He put his hand down my pants. He penetrated my vagina. And then he tried to make me give him oral, but I told him no. And then that's whenever he took me home." And it seems like she told that story to appease her parents that wanted it to be something really major so they could save face in their religious community and say, "Hey, look, you know what? Our girl isn't a SLUT. The only reason she was with this older man is because he basically forced her into this situation." And the parents went with her to the sheriff's department and they actually reported the story then. So that's how that initial one came out. And what I did using my interviewing technique at the time that I'd been trained in is the first thing that we want to do is interview witnesses, victims, and suspects completely separately. And this is why. When she gave her initial statement, there was a victim's advocate in the room. Both of her parents were in the room. A youth pastor was in the room. And so she's sitting there like, fuck, like, oh man, all these adults are here. Now I'm kind of stuck with this story. So I did what's called I asked, so whenever I got her, I let her parents sit in the observation room where they could see what was going on. It was recorded audio and visual. I asked suitability for the interview questions. Hey, how you feeling right now? Mentally, how do you feel? Physically, how do you feel? Read her out her Miranda rights. I did baseline questions, which is a series of non-threatening questions to assess how the person looks when they're being truthful with me, right? And then I began to ask those hard questions out there, Chris. I said, okay, I said, so tell me in your own words what happened that night. And she said, well, blah, 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 blah. And she was giving out a lot of indicators that she had coached her story or she'd been coached herself by someone else. And during the interview with that, now I had interviewed the suspect prior, I'd interviewed other witnesses and all. And I stepped out of the interview room and I consulted with my supervisor. And he says, okay, Frank, what do you got? And I said, well, I said, I think she's making up a story. I said, I think they were in the car together, but I don't believe her story that there was sexual contact, of fingers and penetration and that he did anything. And I said, it sounds to me, because I did a background investigation on her, and I found out about how kind of weird her parents were and how controlling they were. I had interviewed her older sister who'd cut off contact with her parents, and she was giving me some information on it. And I don't want to give any more information because it's still a prominent family in Kershaw, right? I don't want them to come after me. But during this time, I developed, an interrogation strategy. It's a very non-confrontational approach. I went in there with a theme development, and I said, "Hey," and I said, "Look, I don't think you're a bad person." And I said, "I think you felt pressured. You were put up to say that this happened." And I said, "You know what?" And I said, "If you had accused him of going all the way, I wouldn't be in here talking to you. And the most important thing that we can do right now is be truthful and kind of figure out what happened that night." And then she put her head down and she says, "Well, you probably figured it out then. My parents wanted me to say this because they think I'm an SLUT." And then she started crying, talking about her parents. Um, and then at that point, she admitted that she made up the story, but she was pressured by her parents to do so. It was kind of a sad thing. I didn't even contemplate charging her for it either, because she wanted to see the boy again, right? I mean, she wanted to see him. And her parents found text messages where she was talking to her best friend about running away with him, and that's why they pressured her. So, but with the parents, I couldn't do anything with them. Of course, they raged out on me. They raged out against the sheriff's department, where we don't take rape victims seriously and a bunch of nonsense bullshit. But they always neglect to say the part that her parents actually coached her to say that, what she did. And
yeah,
so
I wonder how often the parents are a factor in this.
the parents are, well, it isn't just the parents being a factor, but it's her social dynamic that she's in.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I've done stuff, Chris, that I shouldn't have done because I didn't want to disappoint my loser friends, or I didn't want to disappoint my, my dad, my mom, and stuff like that. Some stuff that I shouldn't have done. And it's those dynamics where, well, you know what? If I tell the truth that, hey, he actually didn't kidnap me and hold me down, then they're going to think I'm a, SLUT, or they're going to think I'm this really bad person. So I know what I'll do is I'll tell them that he actually forced me, but I don't want anything to happen to him. And as a matter of fact, when I would do an interview with someone, when I would run what we call a behavioral analysis interview, Chris, we ask certain questions of somebody to provoke a behavioral response in them that we can look at and assess how they respond to certain questions that we ask. One of those questions that we ask is called the punishment question. And let's say that I have someone who's making an allegation of sexual assault, and let's assume that I have good reason, evidence, witnesses, whatever, to think that the veracity of the victim could be called into question. I'll ask her and say, and I'm going to use the name of Susie. So, Susie, what do you think the punishment should be for Larry for doing this to you? Right now, most people who are a victim of a sexual assault, they're going to answer like jail or death, right? Or but it's going to be typically a harsh punishment. Not in every type of situation. This is just one thing amongst many, how we would evaluate someone. But almost every single one of my false rape suspects there, Chris, they'll do this, they'll look down and they'll say, well, I don't think he should go to jail. Maybe he should get some counseling, Frank, so he knows not to do stuff like this in the future. And I would say, okay. Another question I would ask them is, would you ever consider going out on a second date if he asked you? And almost all of them said, well, if he learned his lesson not to do what he did to me that night, then yeah, I'd consider it. So now I'm going to ask you, if somebody sexually assaulted you, what do you think the punishment should be, Chris?
Uh, well, at least 10 years.
Yeah, at least 10 years, something, right? But you're probably not going to say counseling or community service,
It
right?
depends a lot
Yeah.
on the nature. It depends a lot on the nature of the
It
assault.
yeah. I mean, it
You know,
depends on the background, the context, and stuff like that. But
well,
mhm.
with women, I think there is one thing. Is the question is, can she get pregnant from this or not? To me, that's a big question. It's
Oh yeah. There's
there
been
are.
all kind of
I
psychological.
do wonder, and maybe you don't know this. Did the guy who went out with the girl with the crazy parents, did he ever find out about this? And what happened there? Do you
Yes,
know?
he did. So
And
whenever
I can only imagine what this guy was thinking after he heard that.
So the way it went down was this. A couple weeks later, her parents drove her to the sheriff's department where she made disclosure and she made out a statement. And then she went to the hospital to undergo a sane examination in Richland County. Excuse me. And after that, whenever I got the report, whenever I got the initial statements, I reached out and I re-interviewed to just go over the statement with the victim. And I noticed that at the table at the time, it was an uncontrolled environment. Her parents were there, and I realized that she was under the control of their sway. So I ended up interviewing a bunch of her friends, a bunch of her extended family members, and that's when I talked to the older sister as well. And then because what we want to do is you want to save the primary suspect for the very last. Now you can talk to him and get an initial statement is what you can do, but in general you want to save it. He actually called me and he said, "Hey," and he said, "This is for investigator Schumpert." Of course, he mispronounces my last name, which is okay. And he says, I've heard through the grapevine that so and so is saying that I raped her. I want to come in and talk to you. I didn't do it, blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, okay, well, the guy wants to talk. I did an initial phone call with him. He gave me an initial statement over the phone, essentially what I told you earlier. And he says, look, I knew her family was weird, and that's why she had told him she was going somewhere else. We just didn't want the headache. And he said, but I didn't think I could get in any trouble because she's 20 years old, and she's not, underage. And I asked him to come into the sheriff's office. He gave an initial statement. But before I was going to do the full interview on him, I wanted to do some more background investigation. He'd never been accused of anything before. I tracked down two of his ex-girlfriends. They said that he'd never tried anything like that. A clean background check. I interviewed a bunch of his former coworkers to try and look for the signs and to begin to profile my alleged offender. After that, I kept in contact with him about one day out of the week, and I told him, I said, "Hey, look, I'll let you know if there's updates or if I need you to come in for questioning again." He offered to give a DNA sample, and I said, "That's not necessary because we know who you are. I mean, there's not like a question." So uh, he was overly cooperative. He wanted to provide some documentation to substantiate his side. He provided text messages, and that's in general, and it isn't 100%, but that's your typical innocent person behavior, right? They're really trying to prove their innocence. Parents kind of wanted me to go away. They would call me every now and then to ask if I had arrested him, but they didn't really want deep case updates after that. And what it is they didn't want me asking too many questions. They just wanted that police report, Chris, to go into the community and say, our daughter's not an SLUT, she's blah blah blah. But then I decided that there was enough to bring her in, so I asked her parents to bring her in. I separated the parents from her. I mean, she's 20, she's a freaking adult, right? And went through the entire thing, and I got the full of the details from her. And I didn't charge her. I mean, I don't believe it was her fault, Chris. I mean, there was no reason to. For the parents, there really wasn't anything there I could charge them with. But I eventually called up the suspect and I said, "Hey, man," I said, "you have nothing to worry about." I said, "At least on my end." And he asked me for advice, and I said, "Yeah." And I said, "I would cut off all contact with her and the family." I said, and she was texting him after this from a different
Yeah.
cell phone that she got. And I said, I would tell her, "Hey, babe, I'm sorry, but it's not in the stars. Leo is in retrograde with Mercury or something," and just cut off contact. And I said, "That's a whole crazy basket of bananas." So I
And,
said, I
or
just swing load.
she might also feel really guilty about it. You never know. So I
Yeah.
guess the question is, what advice do you have for men to avoid situations like this?
So the number one thing I would tell you is this is just be aware of those five factors. Okay. 18 to 25, both men and women, when it comes to making logical decisions, to thinking abstractly, to thinking into the future, we're going to be a little bit impaired until we hit about the 25 or 26 range. And I know that if you go on Instagram, TikTok, there's all these pickup artists that like to tell you to date younger and younger. Just know that there's a sign that says, "Hey, there could be a strong riptide here." That's all I'm going to say. 18 to 25, I would go really, really slow, uh, and realize that at that age range, people don't really want to say no right up front, even though they may feel uncomfortable and they don't want to do anything. Let her initiate, let her take the lead and stuff like that, and just back off of her. If she says no to sex, the old cliche, no means no. Just drop the subject
Yeah.
matter. Don't bring it up again ever. And just consider her a platonic friend and move on to the next one after that. Find a girl that will say yes to you, right? So that's number one. Number two is that if you are drinking and doing drugs with someone who you just met, who's 18 to 25, and you're not already in a intimate relationship with them, like you don't have that pattern of trust yet, I would hold off on any kind of intimate contact with that person. That's just my advice. You can take it or leave it. Number three is that if you get your heart broken, if she insults you, if she hurts your ego, don't follow her. Don't talk bad about her. Don't
Yeah.
text to your friends about her. The best thing to do is cut all contact and move on with your life. And talk to a counselor if you have to. Talk to a counselor about those feelings that you're feeling, right? If you start thinking those dark thoughts out there, you could be at an elevated risk for suicide later on. Get a counselor and talk to them about why a breakup or why someone telling you no made you feel the way that you did. Get some counseling, get some help, and definitely don't ever try and do anything like that. If you are dating somebody with a history of mental illness, uh, with the history of mental illness, you want to make sure that there's been enough time from something really bad happening to them an attempt at suicide, being committed to a hospital, to the time you have an intimate contact with that person. If you're talking to a girl, or girls, if you're talking to a boy and that person says, yeah, I've attempted suicide in the past and I'm bipolar, a good follow-up question would be, say, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. When was your last episode? That is perfectly okay. If you're possibly going to be having sex with someone, you're already thinking about sharing your bloodstream and reproductive organs with them. Go ahead and ask these questions. And if they say, well, I tried to kill myself last week, then tell them, hey, I'm really sorry to hear that. You know what? I need to use the restroom really quick. Get up and go to the bathroom and then scan out of there, okay? And then text the person later and say, hey, I hope you can go somewhere and be awesome with someone else. I would just avoid a person like that. So history of mental illness, I'd
Yeah.
back off.
Yeah, I sometimes I think maybe the moral of the story here is just you don't have to go all the way so quickly, and maybe that's
Exactly. Slow
I
down,
do
slow
that,
down. Mhm.
I mean, I don't think we hear any cases, well, he, yeah, because you probably don't hear a guy, well, he just smacked my ass once or something like that. I mean,
Well well,
yeah,
here's the thing about
technically,
yeah.
you,
Mhm.
but you're not going to hear it's just, yeah, I don't, I feel like there's, I want to fix because it seems like the culture is so broken right now.
Mhm. Well,
And,
here's the thing, Chris. Not to cut you off, but there's the world of X, there's the world of Instagram and TikTok, but then we have the real fucking world. And let me assure you, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people in interviews. I've interacted with tons and tons of people in my job. The vast majority of women out there will never make a false allegation,
yeah,
unless there's certain circumstances that are in the background, the age range. But even then, if you look at all five factors of those, that's a thin minority of women who would do something like that. You're more likely to get struck by lightning going to a date than you are your date making a false rape allegation. Unless you're a slimy, creepy piece of shit, then maybe, I don't know, maybe the allegation could be real at that point. But with that being said, they do happen, like a rip tide. The people that swim at a beach, that's not something you really have to worry about. But if you see the sign out there, if you see those five signs, gents and ladies too, men will make false allegations against you as well. If
yeah,
you see those five signs, I wouldn't swim in those waters. I'd go
yeah.
somewhere else.
And I guess the question, the next thing is, what should what should somebody who's not done anything do if they get that phone call, say, hey,
Mhm.
somebody filed this report, what should they do?
The number one thing I would do is I would write out a timeline from first contact
Yeah,
with the suspect who's making, or the alleged victim that's
yeah,
making the accusation. I would print out all text messages, all communications. I would write out a phone log of every text, every phone call. I would write out every place I'd ever met that person, is what I would do. And then once I did that, I would go out and I would get an attorney, give it to the attorney, and let the attorney handle the communication with law enforcement. If law enforcement calls you, uh, it's really important to be super nice to that investigator, because a lot of times, and I hate to say this, okay,
yeah,
I've seen cops where they'll get probable cause to charge someone. I haven't seen this for a sexual assault allegation, but for like a burglary, a robbery, they'll have barely enough probable cause, but they'll sit around and they'll say, damn, you know what? Every time I talked to him on the phone, he was so nice. God, I hate to do this. I don't want to do this to the person. And they'll sit on it and they'll think about it, and then they just won't charge them
yeah,
because they like them. I'm not saying that you have to suck up to them, but when they contact you, say, hey, man, say, I appreciate you reaching out to me. You can deny the allegations over the phone,
yeah,
and I would use real language. Look, I didn't rape her, if that's what she's saying. What
yeah,
she's saying isn't true. But hey, officer, you have a job to do, and I respect what you do. But from this point forward, sir or ma'am, I'm going to have to talk to an attorney. But I promise you, officer, you will be hearing from me or my attorney, and give the
yeah,
officer a time frame and say, hey, in the next 2 or 3 days, you will be hearing from an attorney, sir. But I appreciate the phone call. Thank you for your time. and then just say, but I need to talk to an attorney is what I need to do. Hang up the phone. Then you want to write out that timeline, like I just said. And then
Yeah.
when you talk to an attorney, you already have something to give them, and they can have ammunition to defend you, is what they can do.
Yeah, this is not legal advice, I guess. Save it.
It is not
Yeah,
legal advice.
you
And
know,
yeah.
I know this is not off topic, but you're not that far from Charlotte.
Oh, no. Uh-uh.
What is the general mood among police officers right now about these goons and thugs that are out? They have 10 and 20 convictions or arrests, and then they're still out doing stuff.
Yeah.
Like the guy who stabbed the girl on the subway.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
That's right. Mm-hmm.
it seems like to me, maybe we could, reduce the caseload for prosecutors if we actually put these criminals in jail. I just wanted to ask you about that because
Mm-hmm.
it's
Well,
it's gotta be really frustrating for you guys.
well, I'll tell you this. Most of the law enforcement, we are no, or I say we, I'm not in it anymore, but it still feels
Yeah,
like it. It still feels like I'm in the patrol division in my Crown Vic. It's weird. But most law enforcement are numb to it, Chris. What you saw, what happened to that girl on that tram, stabbed to death
yeah.
by that, by that suspect. We've seen stuff like that almost every week. We're used to it. We're used to pouring our heart, soul, and blood into a case, and then you get some activist judge out there that releases them back onto the streets. We're used to it. We're absolutely used to it. And it's but if you care about it too much, it burns you out emotionally, it burns you out psychologically, and you can become an asshole cop. So most of them, to protect themselves, they say, well, yeah, this has always happened. Some of us are glad that the case is getting national attention. And to be honest with you, if it wasn't for X and the changes that Elon Musk made on from Twitter to X, we never would have seen that fucking footage. We
I don't
never
think
would
you would
have
have seen
seen
that
it.
footage
Yeah,
either.
it would have been nothing. And the fact that he had all those priors and they still let him out is just amazing to me. It is just absolutely amazing that a judge let that happen. Uh, the police officer in North Carolina in general, in particular in the Charlotte Mecklenburg Consolidated Police Force there, they are absolutely first rate men, women of law enforcement, Chris. They are dedicated to their jobs and they're not paid that much. They're not paid or as much as you think they are. Every single person that's doing it did it from a sense of they wanted to help someone, they wanted to investigate. Uh, but every single person there, I was always amazed at their level of professionalism and dedication from that department. But the short answer to your question is you're kind of numb to it. It's like, yeah.
Yeah,
And all of them have a story like that. I had a child molester. I'm sorry. Oops. I shouldn't say that on here, but I had someone who had unconsensual contact with a 4-year-old boy. He was in his late 20s, right? Full confession, right? And he got bonded out on $100,000 cash surety bond. I think they paid like $10,000 on it. He didn't reoffend, but he walked around free for several years pending his trial. I believe he reoffended in another state, so he had other stuff that was coming up out there. But then again, I'm told that judges have to set a bond, and if they can
yeah,
post the bond, they can post it. But my whole thing is like, you don't have to do a cash surety bond. Just make it $100,000, and uh, and the people who give them the bond, these little bond companies, I think they should be held responsible as well. The judges and these bond companies too. So
yeah. That's a tough call. I just want
yeah,
it's so wild, and I think there's very much a difference between the small town police department and the big city when it's because in the small town everybody knows everybody, but
yeah, yeah.
it's well, okay, well, this has been a good talk. Do you have anything else to say before we go? Where can we find you out there? You got your own show too, so
Yes, I do. I have a link tree. I can send you the link tree
yeah,
if you like. We don't have a dedicated website, but we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Just type in Reid on the record, REID on the record, myself, and one of our senior professional instructors, Dan Malloy. is the main host on the show. We talk about interviews, interrogations. We're going to be getting into some criticisms of the Reid technique, criticisms of interrogations in general. And hopefully we'll have some of the critics on in the future. It's just scheduling in 2025 is coming to a close. So,
yeah, Dan, well, it's certainly been interesting. I might want to bring you back sometime, talk about these questioning techniques.
Of course. I would love to. I would absolutely love
well,
to. That
just,
was really
like, how
fun.
do you spot a liar? How can you apply something like this to job interviews and stuff like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, please like this show, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. Check out my Substack. People are giving me money, buymeacoffee.com. Thank you, Frank. I'm Chris Baker. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.